3 days later, the nursery of the Moonhowl was filled with a sound Sarah had never heard before but would never forget, the delighted squeaks and yips of healthy Zetherian cubs at play. 23 young voices created a joyful cacophony that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull. Declaring to the universe that life had triumphed over the shadows, Sarah sat in the center of the chaos, surrounded by cubs who had decided that this strange, pink, furless creature was the most fascinating thing they had ever encountered. Little Zara, the first to fall ill and the first to recover, had claimed a spot on Sarah's lap and was carefully examining her hands with the intense curiosity that only young children possess. "Why do you not have claws?" Zara asked in her piping voice, gently pressing Sarah's fingertips. "How do you climb trees or catch prey?" Sarah laughed, a sound that made several cubs tilt their heads in puzzlement. "Humans develop tools instead of claws," she explained, pulling out her medical scanner to show them. "We make things to help us do what our bodies cannot." The cubs clustered around the device with fascination, their golden eyes wide with wonder. Kess, the cub who had fought the treatment hardest, was particularly interested in how the scanner's light changed colors when pointed at different surfaces. "It sees inside things," Sarah explained. "Like how Healer Thera can hear your heartbeat with her ears. This machine can see your heartbeat with light." Elder Mystic Thera, who had barely left the nursery since the cub's recovery began, nodded approvingly from her place near the wall. "The human healer speaks truth, little ones. Her tools and our knowledge together brought you back from the Shadow Realm." Pack. Leader Varric entered the nursery just as 3 cubs decided to test whether Sarah's strange human clothing was suitable for climbing. Their tiny claws caught in the fabric of her medical coat as they scrambled up her arms and shoulders, turning her into an impromptu climbing structure. "I see you have been adopted," Varric observed with what Sarah was learning to recognize as Zetherian humor, a subtle ear twitch and the barest hint of fang showing at the corner of his mouth. "Apparently," Sarah agreed, gently detaching a cub who had gotten tangled in her hair. "Though I have to say this is the best possible outcome for any medical intervention I've ever performed." Varric's expression grew more serious as he gestured for Sarah to join him near the entrance. She carefully disentangled herself from her small admirers, promising to return soon, and followed him into the corridor where they could speak privately. "Dr. Chun, I have received communications from the Zetherian High Council. Word of what you discovered has reached the highest levels of our government. The deliberate poisoning of our cubs is being treated as an act of war, and there will be consequences for whoever orchestrated this attack." Sarah nodded gravely. "Have you been able to trace the source of the radiation bombardment?" "Our military vessels are investigating the Epsilon Eridani system as we speak. We have also reached out to other species who have had contact with that region recently. It appears we were not the first target." Varric's amber eyes flashed with controlled anger. 3 other ships from different species have reported mysterious illnesses after visiting that system in recent months. None made the connection until now. The implication sent a chill through Sarah. Someone is testing biological weapons on different species, using the asteroid belt as a delivery system. That's a war crime by any galactic standard." "Indeed. And it might have succeeded if not for your intervention. Our healers would have diagnosed the cubs with spirit sickness and focused on traditional remedies. Without understanding the true cause, we would have lost them all." Varric paused, his voice growing heavy with emotion. "Dr. Chun, you must understand what you have done. In Zetherian culture, cubs are not just our children, they are the future of our entire pack structure. Each cub carries the genetic memories and wisdom of their ancestors forward. To lose an entire generation would have been ... catastrophic." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had known the cubs were important, but she was beginning to understand that her intervention had prevented something far worse than individual deaths. It had saved an entire culture's future. "There is something else," Varric continued. "The High Council has voted unanimously to offer humanity a formal alliance. Not just the trade agreements and cultural exchanges we have had before, but a true military and scientific partnership. They believe that any species capable of the compassion and ingenuity you demonstrated should be counted among our closest allies. The offer took Sarah's breath away. Formal alliances between species were rare in galactic politics, usually reserved for civilizations that had known each other for centuries. For the Zetherians to offer such a partnership based on the actions of a single human was unprecedented. Pack leader. I'm honored, but I should point out that I wasn't representing all of humanity when I came here. I was just responding to a medical emergency. Varric's ears twitched in that expression of humor again. Dr. Chun, that is precisely why the Council believes humanity worthy of alliance. You did not come because your government ordered it or because you expected reward. You came because cubs were dying and you thought you could help. That tells us more about your species than decades of formal diplomacy could. Over the following hours, Sarah worked with the ship's communication systems to file detailed reports with both human and galactic medical authorities. Her findings about the artificial radiation poisoning would help other species protect themselves against similar attacks. And her successful treatment protocol could be adapted for different physiologies, but more importantly, she worked with Thara to document the collaborative treatment methods they had developed. The combination of human technology and Zetherian healing wisdom had created something entirely new, a cross-species medical approach that could benefit countless patients in the future. You know, Thara said as they worked side by side, updating medical databases with their combined knowledge. In all my years as a healer, I have never learned so much in such a short time. Your people see sickness differently than we do. Where we see spiritual imbalance, you see chemical processes. Where we see the need for harmony, you see the need for intervention. Sarah looked up from her notes. But both approaches were necessary to save the cubs. Your understanding of their emotional needs was just as important as my medications. Kess would never have recovered without his family's songs. Perhaps, Pharaoh mused. The future of medicine lies not in choosing between traditions, but in combining the best of both. As the Moonhowl prepared to return to Zetherian space, Sarah found herself facing a difficult decision. Admiral Harrison had sent orders recalling her to Earth for debriefing about the alien attack, but the Zetherians had offered her a position as the first human medical advisor to their fleet. It would be temporary. Of course, Varric explained during their final planning meeting. 6 months to a year, helping us train our healers in the diagnostic techniques you used. And you would be working with other human doctors who would join the program. Your people have agreed to the medical exchange as part of the alliance negotiations. Sarah looked around the ship that had become familiar to her over the past week. The Moonhowl hummed with life again, cubs playing in the corridors, adults returning to their normal duties, the quiet efficiency of a healthy community going about its daily routines. She had made a difference here, not just as a doctor, but as a bridge between two very different ways of understanding the world. I accept, she said finally, but I have one condition. I want to set up a joint research station in neutral space, where human and Zetherian medical teams can work together permanently. If there are other species out there using biological weapons, we need to be prepared. Varric's response was interrupted by a small commotion from the corridor. 3 cubs came tumbling through the doorway, with Zara in the lead, all of them talking at once in their excited, high-pitched voices. Dr. Sarah? Dr. Sarah. Zara squeaked, bouncing with excitement. We made you something. The cubs presented her with a small object that took Sarah a moment to recognize. It was a crystal, but not one of the dangerous radioactive specimens from the asteroid belt. This one had been carefully carved and polished, shaped into a miniature representation of her medical scanner. Tiny Zetherian claw marks covered its surface in intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. It's beautiful, Sarah said, genuinely moved by the gift. But what do the markings mean? Zara pointed to different sections of the crystal with obvious pride. This part shows you arriving on our ship when we were sick. This part shows you working to make us better. And this part shows us all playing together after you healed us. Elder Thera says it's a memory crystal, so you will always remember that you saved us, and we will always remember that humans are our friends. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she accepted the crystal. In Zetherian culture, memory crystals were among the most precious gifts possible, physical representations of important events that would be passed down through generations. The Cubs had created a permanent record of their salvation, one that would be told and retold in Zetherian oral tradition for centuries to come. "Thank you," she managed to. The lower storage bay of the Moonhowl was a vast space filled with carefully organized containers and equipment. But as soon as Sarah stepped through the doorway, her portable atmosphere detector began chirping urgently. The readings made her blood run cold. "Pack leader, I need everyone out of this area immediately," Sarah said, her voice sharp with alarm. "And seal the doors behind us." Varric's ears flattened against his head. "Dr. Chun, what is it?" "Radiation," Sarah replied grimly, studying her scanner's display. "Low level, but consistent. And something else, ... She adjusted her detector's settings, running through different spectral analyses. "Radon gas. The crystals you collected are emitting radon gas." The revelation hit Varric like a physical blow. His legs seemed to give out slightly, and he leaned against the corridor wall. "But we have collected crystals from that system before. Many times. How is this possible?" Sarah was already working through the implications, her medical training kicking into high gear. Radon exposure can cause exactly what we're seeing in the Cubs: neurological depression, respiratory distress, loss of consciousness. But the question is why the crystals are emitting it now when they haven't before. They sealed the storage bay and made their way back to the nursery, where Sarah immediately began running more detailed scans on the Cubs. This time she knew what to look for. The results confirmed her worst fears. Every single Cub showed signs of radon poisoning, with radiation levels in their blood that would have been lethal to humans. "The good news," Sarah said, trying to inject hope into her voice, "is that we know what we're dealing with. Radon poisoning can be treated if we act quickly. The bad news is that Zetherian physiology processes radiation differently than human physiology. I'm going to need to adapt human treatment protocols." Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with an intensity that surprised even her. She analyzed blood samples, ran toxicology screens, and compared the Cub's current condition to baseline Zetherian medical data from her research files. The adult Zetherians watched her work with a mixture of hope and skepticism, some continuing their healing songs, while others simply sat vigil beside their young. The breakthrough came when Sarah realized that the Cub's rapid metabolic rate, which normally gave them incredible healing abilities, was actually working against them in this case. They were processing the radon faster than adult Zetherians, which meant higher concentrations in their developing nervous systems. "I need to slow down their metabolism," Sarah explained to Varric, who had not left her side since they discovered the source of the poisoning. "In humans, we would use hypothermic therapy and specific medications to reduce cellular activity, but I need to know more about Zetherian biochemistry to adapt the treatment safely." Varric gestured to an elderly Zetherian female who had been quietly observing from the corner. "Dr. Chun, this is Elder Mystic Thera, our most experienced healer. She knows more about Cub physiology than anyone on this ship." Thera approached slowly, her ancient eyes studying Sarah with obvious curiosity. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of experience. "Human healer, I have watched you work. Your methods are strange to us, but there is wisdom in your approach. Tell me what you need to know." For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Thera worked together in an unprecedented collaboration between human science and Zetherian healing knowledge. Thera explained the intricacies of Cub development, their unique metabolic cycles, and the traditional methods used to slow their systems during times of illness. "In the old days, when Cubs suffered from mountain fever, we would take them to the ice caves," Thera explained. "The cold would slow their bodies, give their spirits time to fight the sickness. But we have no ice caves here in space." Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. "But we can create the same effect artificially." I can modify the environmental systems in this chamber to gradually lower the temperature, while administering medication to support their reduced metabolic state. Working with the ship's engineers, Sarah began implementing her treatment plan. It was a delicate balance. Too much cooling could kill the cubs, too little would be ineffective. She had to calculate dosages for medications that had never been tested on Zetherian physiology. Using mathematical models and her best understanding of their biological systems, the first test came with Zara, the cub who had fallen ill first. Sarah carefully administered a modified dose of human hypothermic protocol drugs, adapted based on Thara's knowledge of Zetherian metabolism. The entire nursery fell silent except for the hum of the modified environmental systems as the temperature began to drop gradually. For the first hour, nothing happened. Zara remained motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. Sarah checked and rechecked her vital signs, making minor adjustments to the treatment protocol. The watching Zetherians began to shift restlessly, some resuming their healing songs with renewed urgency. Then, just as Sarah was beginning to doubt her approach, Zara's breathing changed. It became slower, more regular. Her heart rate, which had been racing dangerously, began to slow to a more sustainable rhythm. Most importantly, her brain activity showed signs of stabilization. "It's working," Sarah whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Her nervous system is starting to recover." The change in the room was electric. The healing songs grew stronger and more hopeful, and Sarah could see tears of relief beginning to form in several sets of amber eyes. But she knew the real test was still ahead. They needed to treat all 23 cubs, and each one would require individual monitoring and adjustment. Over the next 18 hours, Sarah worked without rest. She moved from cub to cub, calculating dosages, monitoring vital signs, and making constant adjustments to the environmental controls. Thera remained beside her throughout, sharing traditional knowledge and helping to interpret signs that human medicine might miss. The process was exhausting and nerve-wracking. 2 cubs took longer to respond than others, requiring additional medications and careful fine-tuning of their treatment. 1 cub, a small male named Kess, after the pilot who had brought Sarah to the ship, seemed to be fighting the treatment itself. "His spirit is strong," Thera observed, watching the young male's readings fluctuate wildly. "Perhaps too strong. He fights the sleep that would heal him." Sarah studied Kess's scans, noting the elevated stress hormones and erratic brain patterns. "He's fighting the sedation." In humans, we sometimes see this with patients who have experienced trauma. Is there anything in his background that might explain it? Varric, who had been taking short naps between status updates, came over to examine his young clan member. "Kess was born during a meteor storm that damaged our ship. He has always been hypervigilant, always ready to fight or flee. Even as a small cub, he would not sleep deeply." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to approach this differently. Instead of forcing his system to slow down, we need to convince it that it's safe to do so." She turned to Thera. "Are there any traditional methods for calming anxious cubs?" Thera's weathered face broke into the first smile Sarah had seen since arriving on the ship. "There is something. But it requires the participation of his family pack." Within minutes, Kess's parents and siblings had gathered around his sleeping area. They began a specific type of healing song, one that Sarah learned was traditionally used to calm cubs during thunderstorms or other frightening events. The melody was different from the general healing songs, softer, more rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. As the family song continued, Sarah watched Kess's vital signs begin to stabilize. His stress hormones dropped, his brain patterns smoothed out, and finally his body began to accept the treatment. Within an hour, he was showing the same positive response as the other cubs. But even as the medical crisis began to resolve, Sarah knew there were larger questions that needed addressing. She approached Varric during one of her brief rest periods, her exhaustion evident but her determination unwavering. "Pack leader, we need to talk about why these crystals are suddenly radioactive when they weren't before. This isn't a natural occurrence." Varric's expression grew troubled. "What are you suggesting, Dr. Chun?" Sarah pulled up her scanner readings and showed him the detailed analysis she had been running. The radiation signature is artificial. Someone or something has been bombarding that asteroid field with high-energy particles, transforming stable crystals into radioactive ones. This was deliberate. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If Sarah was right, then the Cubs' poisoning wasn't an accident, it was an attack. An attack specifically targeted at young Zetherians, designed to look like natural illness. Who would do such a thing? Varric asked, his voice barely containing his rage. And why target our cubs? Sarah had been thinking about that question for hours. Someone who understands Zetherian culture well enough to know that cubs gather the navigation crystals. Someone who wanted to damage your clan specifically, or maybe test a new weapon against your species. The timing suggests they knew you would be coming to collect crystals from that system. As the truth of the situation sank in, Varric's expression transformed from grief to fury. The cubs were recovering, but they had been deliberately poisoned by an unknown enemy. The implications for Zetherian society and galactic politics were staggering. Dr. Chun. The communication console crackled to life in the medical bay of the research station Harmony, its blue glow casting eerie shadows across Dr. Sarah Chun's tired face. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, cataloging samples from the newly discovered Kepler 442b, when the desperate message cut through the silence of space. Human vessel. This is Pack Leader Varric of the Zetherian clanship Moonhowl. We require immediate medical assistance. Our cubs are dying. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, the dark liquid spreading across her research notes. In the 3 years since humanity had made first contact with the Zetherians, there had been cordial exchanges of technology and knowledge, but never a direct plea for help. The Volf-like aliens were proud, maintaining strict hierarchies and rarely showing weakness to outsiders. She activated the response channel, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This is Dr. Sarah Chun aboard the research station Harmony. What kind of medical assistance do you need, Pack Leader Varric? A long pause followed. Sarah could hear muffled voices in the background, speaking in the complex growling language of the Zetherians. When Varric's voice returned, it carried a weight of desperation that transcended species barriers. Dr. Chun, you are the human healer who studied our anatomy exchanges, correct? The one who wrote the cross-species biological compatibility reports? That's right, Sarah confirmed, her mind already racing through the medical files she had compiled during the cultural exchange programs. The Zetherians were fascinating from a biological standpoint, mammalian pack creatures with complex social structures, heightened senses, and remarkable healing abilities. Their cubs, in particular, had always interested her due to their rapid development cycles. Our cubs are afflicted with something our healers cannot understand, Varric continued, his normally commanding tone cracking with emotion. They are fading quickly. Their life force dims with each passing hour. We have lost 12 already. 23 remain, but they grow weaker. Our medical priests are powerless. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward. How long have they been sick? 4 days. It began suddenly, without warning. They refuse food, their temperature drops, and they slip into a sleep from which some do not wake. We have tried every traditional remedy, every healing song, every herb our ancestors used. Nothing helps. The urgency in Varric's voice sent chills down Sarah's spine. She had read about Zetherian cubs in the cultural exchanges. They were typically robust, energetic creatures with remarkable immune systems. For an entire generation to fall ill simultaneously suggested something catastrophic. Pack Leader Varric, I need you to send me all the medical data you can. Symptoms, timeline, environmental factors, anything your healers have documented. And I need permission to board your ship. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah knew she was asking for something unprecedented. No human had ever been aboard a Zetherian clan ship during a time of crisis. Their vessels were sacred spaces, typically off-limits to outsiders except during formal diplomatic meetings. Dr. Chun, Varric's voice returned, heavy with consideration, you understand that what you ask is against our customs. A clan ship in crisis is a private matter. Our vulnerability is not meant for foreign eyes. Sarah felt her frustration building. Every second they spent on protocol could mean another life lost. Pack leader, with respect, your customs won't save your cubs? I've studied Zetherian physiology more extensively than any other human. I might be able to help, but only if I can examine the patients directly. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the weight of young lives hanging in the balance. She thought about the images she had seen during the cultural exchanges, Zetherian cubs with their bright golden eyes, their playful nature, their importance to the pack structure. In Zetherian society, cubs represented the future of the entire clan. Losing a generation would be devastating beyond human comprehension. Finally, Varric's voice returned, barely above a whisper. Dr. Chun, I am transmitting our coordinates. Prepare yourself for immediate departure. You will be met by our shuttlecraft in 1 hour. Come alone and come quickly. Sarah was already moving before Varric finished speaking, gathering her medical equipment and portable diagnostic tools. She packed everything she could think of: broad-spectrum antibiotics, antivirals, immune system boosters, portable scanners, and her complete research files on Zetherian biology. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with possibilities. What could cause such rapid, widespread illness in a species known for its robust health? Environmental toxin? Viral infection? Genetic disorder? The timing suggested an acute onset which ruled out most hereditary conditions. The fact that it was affecting only the cubs pointed to something age-specific, perhaps related to their developing immune systems or rapid growth phases. As Sarah sealed her medical kit, she paused to send a message to her research partner, Dr. James Wright, who was currently on Earth submitting their findings to the Interspecies Medical Council. James. Responding to medical emergency on Zetherian clan ship. Cubs dying of unknown illness. We'll send updates as situation develops. If you don't hear from me in 72 hours, contact Admiral Harrison. Sarah? The shuttle ride to the Zetherian ship Moonhowl took 37 minutes, but it felt like hours. The Zetherian pilot, a female named Kess, said nothing during the journey, but Sarah could sense her anxiety. The pilot's hands gripped the controls with unusual tension, and her ears, pointed and mobile like a valve's, kept twitching toward the communication panel, as if listening for updates from her home ship. When they finally docked with the Moonhowl, Sarah was struck by the ship's design. Unlike human vessels with their sterile corridors and artificial lighting, the Zetherian ship felt organic. The walls curved naturally, the lighting was warm and amber-toned, and there was a subtle scent in the air that reminded Sarah of pine forests and wild spaces. Pack leader Varric met them at the docking bay, and Sarah was immediately struck by his appearance. She had met him twice before during formal diplomatic meetings, where he had appeared proud and commanding. Now his usual silver-gray fur looked disheveled. His amber eyes were bloodshot with exhaustion, and his powerful shoulders sagged with the weight of his people's crisis. Dr. Chun, he said, his accent thick with stress, thank you for coming. Time is our enemy now. As they hurried through the corridors of the ship, Sarah noticed the unusual quiet. During her previous visits to Zetherian vessels, there had always been the sounds of activity, conversations, the patting of feet on deck plates, the distant sounds of cubs playing. Now the silence felt oppressive, broken only by their footsteps and the distant hum of the ship's engines. They passed several adult Zetherians in the corridors, all of whom turned to stare at Sarah with expressions mixing hope and skepticism. Some nodded respectfully, others simply watched with the intense gaze characteristic of their species. Sarah could feel the weight of their expectations, the desperate hope that this strange alien might succeed where their own healers had failed. The cubs are housed in our nursery complex, Varric explained as they walked. We have isolated them from the adult population as a precaution, though none of the adults show symptoms. Our healers remain with them, providing what comfort they can. But their condition continues to deteriorate. As they approached a large set of double doors, Sarah could hear something that made her heart clench, the sound of adult Zetherians singing. It was a low, harmonious howling that seemed to carry both sorrow and hope. The healing songs Varric had mentioned. They have been singing continuously since the first cub fell ill, Varric explained, noticing her expression. In our culture, we believe that the voices of the pack can guide lost souls back to health. But even our strongest songs seem powerless against this affliction. The doors opened, and Sarah stepped into a large, warmly lit chamber that took her breath away. The nursery was designed to mimic a natural den environment, with soft bedding materials covering the floor, gentle lighting that simulated natural sunlight, and climbing structures that would normally be used for play. But instead of the active, playful environment she expected, the space was filled with small, still forms. 20-3 Zetherian cubs lay scattered throughout the room, each one motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of their breathing. They were smaller than Sarah had expected, about the size of human toddlers, with soft gray and brown fur and closed eyes. Several adult Zetherians moved quietly among them, the healers and caretakers, their faces etched with grief and determination. The singing continued, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Some of the adult Zetherians swayed slightly as they sang, their eyes fixed on the sick cubs with an intensity that spoke of love and desperation. Sarah knelt beside the nearest cub, a small female with golden-brown fur. The young Zetherian's breathing was labored, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. When Sarah carefully lifted one of her eyelids, the pupil beneath was dilated and unresponsive to the light from her medical scanner. "When did the symptoms first appear?" Sarah asked, running her portable scanner over the cub's body. Varric knelt beside her, his massive form surprisingly gentle as he reacted.